Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I've got a couple bins over here that I want to check in on today. They're red wigglers. They're among my oldest systems. They're systems where we used to feed one side to the other and refer to it as sort of the back and forth bins or the ping pong bins, but we recently transformed them to being wedge fed, which is almost like a horizontal migration, except it's not after just migrating the worms out of the material. It's really meant to be managed that way, where one side gets fed, the other side is more or less finished stuff at this point. And it's kind of a conveyor belt where you can even start harvesting the finished stuff out of the other side and continue maintaining the other end. So that's the way we've been managing these systems for a couple days now, a couple times now. And well, one of them is plastic covered, one of them is cardboard covered. We had intended to change that the last time we were in here, but I completely forgot. So the one that was covered in plastic is still covered in plastic. And it was such a difference too. When we went in here last time, you could tell quite a significant difference in how much drier the material in here was. I was down here yesterday maintaining some stuff, putting away some eggshells that were stashed out here to dry for a while before I put them away. I had some things like refilling my water bottle, my spray bottle, to make that ready to go. And since I had the spray bottle in my hand, I did put sort of a band-aid on there and douse that system with some water yesterday. But I've got a plastic covering here. So we're going to go ahead and feed them, but at the end, I already put the plastic out here to make sure we cover them this time so they don't continue to get drier and drier. And since they are among my oldest systems, they're probably not going to be around for much longer. But let's get them fed, and then we'll be good for a little while longer. So what I came down with for them is a big bag of frozen veggies and fruits, kitchen scraps. So that's a pretty generous portion if you ask me, because it's not only that, but there's also a whole bunch of used napkins and paper towels they're going to get as bedding. Plus, each bin's going to get a day's worth of coffee. And I'm even questioning whether this cardboard has any function anymore. I kind of like the way the other system looks, where the plastic is resting straight on top of the bedding, and the worms seem to enjoy it. Right, I could see that our feeding zone indicator, which was showing us which side of the bin is the wedge, was stuck to the top covering here. That thing's pretty beaten up since we've got some nice fresh coffee filters. We could just use this as supplementary bedding too. So now, let's see here. This would be the side that we fed on last time, and I guess the one thing we observed was how dry and almost desolate the other end of the bin was, where we theoretically have only finished castings. And I have no reason to think things are going to be any different here. Some people even said, hey, why don't you start scooping stuff out of here? Harvesting these castings, there's really no reason I wouldn't be able to. In fact, I don't think there's... I'm mistaken. That's kind of good. Last time, I think when we looked in here, we didn't observe any worms hanging out in it, but it looks like maybe my generous application of water only yesterday resulted in worms feeling comfortable enough to return to this material to continue working on it. Just weird, I somehow bumped into a few sticks here. Things that, you know, don't really lend themselves to worm bins very good, unless your worm bin's just continuously going forever and ever. Stuff like this has a very slim chance of getting broken down, so here it seems sensible to just pull it out when I start finding it. I think it's the sort of stuff that just gets mixed up in my leaf supply, because my leaf supply is really just stuff that I use my leaf blower / vacuum to collect up in the autumn, and then I just grab handfuls of it and jam it into a box so as to use it down here. But the leaf vac actually sucks up some small particle things like, you know, sticks and whatever, and they end up in there amongst the leaves. This to me looks like a chunk of plastic snuck in here too. Sometimes I wonder if that's the way some of this unusual debris makes its way into my systems too, is possibly through the leaf vac and through my leaves. And this stuff is oddly reminiscent of some material that I've been coping with in some of my other systems. It might not be the same. That stuff is like springy and rubbery almost. So this is kind of nice to see, and I think once we put the plastic coverings on here, the moisture in this stuff will remain and maybe even increase a little bit making it a little bit more hospitable for the worms to come back over into. And since I'm in no hurry to harvest the material, I really don't mind them going over there, because you can see there's all kinds of little particle matter in here that they can continue working on, I believe. So I believe that that's actually a good thing. This seems like some sort of reinforcing strand from maybe some tape or something, but I believe that that stuff eventually goes too. You just got to be patient. Here's more of my prepared bedding. So I'm going to just sort of start gently moving things further and further over in order to give ourselves a little bit more space into which we can put today's feeding. And here we go. Now theoretically, as we approach the feeding area where the foods that we gave them last time probably also emitted some moisture as they broke down, there's probably going to get to be more and more worms within the material as we approach the previous feeding zone. So let's see how many worms we've got in here. Oh, it looks like we've got quite a few. And it also looks like they're really enjoying the bedding that we've been giving them. They're all over this stuff, and maybe that's just because they're huddling down low in order to get away from the more dry stuff out on the surface. Here again, this is a little bit deceiving because I did put a lot of moisture in here last night or yesterday afternoon, sort of masking the problem in a way, but it seemed like the right thing to do. All right, let's just move all these little guys aside so we can make some room for the feeding. This will also give us a little bit of a sense of how many worms occupy this system here. Oops. There's a pumpkin stem. And I guess besides the pumpkin stem and those couple of corn cobs, I'm not expecting to see too many leftovers. It's been 10 days since that last feeding, so if we find something like, well, this banana stem I believe has been in here for quite a while too. I sort of remember rounding that up with the pumpkin stem and treating it as just another stem in the collection. So I think we've given ourselves a fair bit of space here into which we could place today's feeding. All right. Interesting how much lighter the material is out here on this edge. Again, I wonder if it might have to do with just the moisture levels. Let's see here. Like I said, my intention was to give them this stuff as bedding today. So let's see if I can give them sort of a even split. Yeah, that seems like about half of them. So I think 3 or 4 of these paper towels down at the bottom should be a good foundation onto which we can drop their feeding today. I thought I had more of this stuff. Actually, I do. I have a whole pile of colorful stuff. I was just thinking of the stuff that I bought down directly from the kitchen. But that's fine. Let's begin divvying up this generous portion of food. I don't know how to do it exactly. I figured I'll just maybe see if I can hold on to part of it while I pour the other part of it out of the bag. You can see there's all kinds of celery, various materials used to make a soup recently. There's also a hole in this bag, so I prefer not to let stuff slip out. And I guess this would be our chance to try to size up whether or not we were successful in divvying this out evenly and fairly. So here I've got some banana peel, but I'm not sure any banana peel made it in, so let's make sure they get some of that. And I think that should do. All these things, I believe, maybe not so much with the banana peel, but all these chunks of celery and maybe even these soup greens here, these things will probably emit a little bit of moisture as they thaw. Let's not forget about returning these old food scraps down here too. That's a pretty nice, generous feeding if you ask me. Let's include a little bit of my crushed eggshell here. That was the other thing I did, was I just reloaded my eggshell supply here. And let's not forget the coffee, because we just went ahead and we took the old coffee filter that was marking where we last fed and included it as part of the bedding. So this one here will simply end up replacing it out here on the top surface, just to show us which edge of the bin it is that we're feeding on. Not that it would be so difficult to tell. You can usually tell there's a pretty obvious slope a downward grade where the feeding had been, indicating the sort of vacuum that's created as a result of the worms consuming and breaking the stuff down. And this is my worm chow. It's just a pulverized collection of seeds and grains and nuts and maybe some neem seed meal, maybe some flour, maybe some starch, whatever I've got laying around. Now this is another one of these novelty items that has been moving from bin to bin to bin for a couple of years now. It's a cork. And I think that these little pieces of it missing are really not worm activity resulting in it being broken down. I think I might have just accidentally chipped away at it with my finger once. My preference on stuff like that is to not help it along, and if possible just observe how the worms do with it without my help. So I guess we're gonna see if we can gradually level things off here. I think we're almost there. And like I said, we're gonna use another banana stem. Doing pretty good. So yeah, I think we're gonna just place the plastic covering right across the top here. And I'm gonna do so pretty thoroughly, going from edge to edge all the way around, which should result in a great deal more worm traffic out here on the top surface of the system, because the plastic will force recirculation of the moisture in the system. And I'm happy to say that, you know, despite what appeared to be maybe a too dry system last time we were in here, everything in here seems really nice. I don't know if it's because I did come in here yesterday with the water bottle and compensate or what, but luckily things are looking pretty good in here. So I didn't know if I'd be bringing my water bottle into play here, but you know what, I did bring this water bottle, and even though I don't see any evidence of it, I'm going to apply just a little bit, because this stuff actually has that BTI solution, the mosquito dunks, and that BTI bacteria, even though I don't see flying insects in here, I don't mind putting a little bit of this stuff into the system as sort of a preventative measure, just in case the flying insects try to get wise to the situation and move in. They won't do too good in here as a result of that stuff being in there. So yeah, this is a pretty thorough covering. It's not going to allow for a great deal of airflow. Sometimes I'll just come back later and maybe put a little wrinkle on the edge or whatever, just to make sure some air can come and go. But right now I'm more interested in just seeing the whole system get nice and damp. And then at some point maybe we can even start thinking about pulling castings out of here, or maybe migrating the worms into a new location. But for now I think we're done in here. Let's go get the other system. Here we go. Okay, now this is the system. I don't know if I think it was on the little green board. This is the system where we've also been testing experimental bedding materials, cotton and twine. The twine got consumed pretty quickly by the worms, but the cotton is still in here. There it is on the bottom of the board, 209 days. So tomorrow will be 210, that's 30 weeks of the cotton being in here. The cotton was originally some chunks of beach towel, and the beach towel is gone. It's been gone for quite a while now, maybe a couple months now, but the other cotton item I placed in here was socks. And the socks seem to be holding up because I think a lot of the material that it's made up of is some sort of a synthetic, stretchy, elastic material. And you could certainly see signs of the cotton being depleted and consumed. So it makes me wonder if, you know, what remains is not even going to get eaten anymore, because maybe it's not even cotton anymore. Maybe they've already eaten all the cotton out of those socks. So once again, I'm just going to check this edge that's not being fed. This is the side that theoretically is just castings only for the most part. And the worms seem quite content to be in it. If at some point I really wanted to just sort of do away with an ongoing wedge management of this system, it would be really easy to transition to a horizontal migration. But at that point, I think I'd be looking to allow this stuff on this edge to really, you know, start drying out, becoming less of a comfortable place for the worms to hang out in. And at that point, maybe we would cover with plastic only on the side where we're continuing to feed, And then at that point, those feedings are really more meant to lure the worms out of their finished castings and get them migrated, versus it just being built that way to be managed that way perpetually. So yeah, this very nice batch of castings. Both of the systems have very nice castings in them. Kind of makes you wonder what it is about this stuff that the worms like. You know, why do they keep ending up over there? There must be, you know, residual foods, but then, you know, you always hear how worms are able to continue eating their old castings over and over again, many times, since the initial time they eat something fresh. Their body extracts so little of the nourishment in that material that it's still quite a viable food source going forward for them just to re-ingest their castings. But I think that also results in castings that become super, super fine and almost like sand. And I mean, they're still worm castings, but they don't have the sort of the structure like the types of castings that you like to use in your garden. So there is a limit to how many times you want to have the worms continue eating their own poop, as gross as that may seem. But, you know, I guess if you've been doing it for a while, it doesn't really faze you when you think about it. It just seems like the way nature works, and it is what it is, right? Alright, so here again, I'm just doing the same thing, gradually trying to bring over, I guess the nice thing would be to try to skim off this really nice casting material and move that into the direction of where the finished stuff is, and maybe leave behind just some of the bedding. I kind of like the idea of using these larger chunks of bedding, just these sheets of newspaper, or no, not newspaper, the sheets of paper towel, because they can nibble away at that stuff. But if I really felt like I needed to extract it, I could maybe, you know, pull out a fairly large chunk of stuff, as opposed to having shreds and shreds of paper everywhere. So I think if we're going to apply bedding going forward in these systems, we're going to also do so in a way that, you know, keeps in mind that we might be looking to get these worms out of here at some point soon, and we wouldn't want to litter their beautiful castings with all kinds of shred paper anymore. So I think I'm going to be transitioning to bedding materials that are going to be a little bit easier to pull out if we should decide to do so. So here's one of the socks. There's a pair of them in here, and I chopped each sock in half. So this is the bottom part that goes around your foot. That's the heel. There's the toe. And then the top section is probably made up mostly of cotton, because all that remains is the very end of it that goes on the top of your calf and holds the sock up from sliding down your leg. And I've been trying to gauge whether I see any progress on these anymore. I don't think I've seen a whole lot of progress. I mean, they seem pretty, you know, pretty static in terms of changing. It's just funny because this is how I sometimes manage to track down the other piece. Just follow, geez, okay, we gotta be careful. Just track this other piece down by following the elastic that leads to it. There it is. We managed to fish it out almost literally. Man, look at all the worms in here. Both of these bins seem awfully, awfully busy. I bet I could easily take the worms from these two systems and launch either, you know, just two more very heavily populated bins, or, you know, maybe divide them up into a few systems, spread them out a little bit so they can continue to expand their numbers. Because, like, if worms really start to sense that they're running out of space, they'll back off their breeding and try to limit their population so as to avoid overpopulating their environment. And you don't want to have that happen. I mean, I guess it's a good in a way if you're not planning to increase your numbers, but I really don't mind having a few more bins of these red wigglers. These red wigglers do such a nice job, and they're so flexible in terms of many things, you know, the ranges of temperatures that they're comfortable living in and continuing to be active in. They're just easygoing in terms of handling them. They don't freak out from being, handled as roughly as I handle them, like some other worm types sometimes do. They're one of the worm types that also respond well to the presence of bright lights, so they'll dive down out of their material in pursuit of darkness, making it easy to scoop up the material that they're in afterwards after they leave it due to the bright lights. That's when you use that light harvesting techniques. Other worm types just don't really get fazed by the bright lights and are content just to hang out in the bright lights, so it's not as easy to use that light harvesting method on other types of worms. But here they would work well. These red wigglers do that quite nicely. It's just interesting how these really itsy bitsy baby worms stick to the glove. There's a lot of them in here, so that's, I think, evidence right there on my fingertip that they're not put off by the number of worms in the system. They're clearly continuing to breed, otherwise we wouldn't see all those little baby worms everywhere. Okay, this was our old feeding zone indicator. Now, how did we do this last time? I think we wanted to make sure we put these old scraps of food down here, but I also like putting these cotton objects down right below the food that we're putting in, so that they end up sucking up some of the moisture that drips out of the thawing fruits and veggies and making the stuff even more appealing for the worms to come hang out in. And they do seem to like the material to hang out on. Whether they're still eating it anymore, though, I'm not sure. It does seem to me like there's been very little signs of ongoing wear of these cotton objects, so they might have reached the end of the line in terms of being consumed by the worms as best as they can. So the experiment might be over technically, but I'm not in a hurry to pull this stuff out, especially if the worms enjoy hanging out on this stuff. I just always feel like I'm going to end up dropping one of these little worms off my glove and having them end up someplace that they're not going to do too good in, like on the floor, or even on my dry pink paper tablecloth. And I think, let's see, I mean, just visually now we get a chance to see if we did a good job splitting up our food supply here. I think we did. It seems like a pretty fair split. Maybe not as much celery in here as the other one, but the other one doesn't seem like it got as many of these large objects, whatever that is. Again, another contribution from my mom that I'm not even quite sure what it is, but it's some sort of a veggie that is used to make the soup stock, the broth. But then it's not the type of veggie that you'd want to consume afterwards, like carrots or anything. It's just the type of, oops. It's a type of veggie that you end up just pulling out and extracting from the soup in the end. All right, I just dropped a bunch of coffee on the floor. Let's clean that up. All right, I didn't get it all. Some is on the floor. I'll have to sweep that up later, get my broom and my dustpan. But here's my worm chow again. I kind of like putting it onto the coffee or with the coffee, or when I'm applying this type of bedding, I like mixing it with that too, because it seems like the worm chow combined with other things is probably the better way to apply it. And I think we're pretty much good to go, right? So let's start leveling things off here. Here the moisture level feels quite good all over. In fact, almost too damp if you ask me, but that's okay for now. I'm not going to worry about it. As long as everything's granular like this and crumbly, I don't mind how damp it is. It does feel like it might be on the verge of getting muddy and clumpy, and that I definitely don't want to see happen. So I'm going to be keeping an eye on that just to make sure it doesn't end up going that route. But I got a feeling that these worms aren't going to be living in these containers very much longer, because the castings are really starting to pile up. Their numbers are really starting to pile up too. So I can certainly see, you know, splitting these populations out into multiple systems versus just moving them into something new. I could just move them into something new and maintain just two systems, and just have two very productive, highly populated systems. But then I guess I wouldn't really benefit from the tendency of the worms to want to reproduce. I guess on the other end of the spectrum, I've been also interested in maybe increasing my overall population size And, well, I guess we'll see where all that leads. For now, I guess we're pretty much done here. I just sprayed in some of that water that has the BTI solution in it. Here again, not because I saw any insects, but maybe more just as a precautionary measure to make sure that they don't wind up in here. And here again, we've got a little bit of opening here and there, allowing for some airflow, but not a whole lot. It's pretty much sort of a terrarium setup, doing its best to hang on to its existing moisture, and that will always help, you know, just expand the worm traffic into all reaches of the system versus allowing certain parts of it to become dry and barren and inhospitable for the worms. And, well, I don't know, this cardboard here, I suppose I could maybe at some point tear it up and try to use it as some form of bedding or something in one of my systems, but for now I think swapping it out with the plastic coverings was probably a good idea here. In the other one, not here. Here we already had the plastic coverings. All right, everyone, that's it for today's check-in with our red wiggler systems. And that was feeding number 20, feeding number 21 here, feeding number 23 in the other one. So it's piling up. All right, everyone, thanks so much for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. It's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel. That's very much appreciated as well. All right, everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.